Welcome to Dadograms. I'm Jason Garrett, a retired Navy pilot, business owner, and dad, and I created Dadograms to teach each and every one of you how to win in life. Now, today's topic isn't flashy, but it cuts straight to the foundation of what keeps our country together. That's such things as rule of law, trust in government, trust in the process, and basic fairness. Because when people stop trusting that the rules apply evenly to everyone, the whole system sort of shifts or starts to wobble. And lately, I've been watching something that, at least to me, shows how fragile that trust has become. It's the way our nation's leadership has used the power of mercy. I'm talking about presidential pardons here. The presidential pardon is one of the oldest powers in the Constitution. Article 2 gives the president authority to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Now, that power was designed for mercy, not manipulation. The founders understood that the laws can't cover every single situation perfectly, that sometimes justice needs compassion. And in early America, presidents used it sparingly and solemnly. For instance, George Washington pardoned the leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion, not because he agreed with them, but because he wanted to keep the young nation from tearing itself apart. Abraham Lincoln used it during the Civil War to bring deserters home and heal division. Even Jimmy Carter, after Vietnam, pardoned the draft dodgers, not because he condoned their actions, not by any means, but to close one of the deepest wounds in our nation's memory. Each of these acts was controversial at the time, but they shared one thing in common. They were done for the country's good, not the leader's good. That's what the power of mercy was supposed to be, a healing action, not a political one. But as the decades passed, that high standard began to crack. Not collapse, not yet, but crack. Consider, back in the 1990s, Bill Clinton's last day pardon of financier Mark Rich, a fugitive charged with tax evasion. It looked bad. It looked like influence. After all, Rich's ex-wife had been a donor, and the decision bypassed the normal Justice Department review process. A bad call? Probably. But it was an isolated incident, not a pattern. Then there was George W. Bush, who commuted the prison sentence of his aide, Scooter Libby, who'd been convicted of perjury and obstruction of justice. The reasoning was that the punishment was excessive, but to most Americans, it looked like a president protecting his own inner circle. Still, again, it was one case, not a governing philosophy, okay? Then there was Barack Obama, who issued more clemencies than any modern president. Over 1,700 commutations, mostly for nonviolent drug offenders serving decades-long prison sentences. That drew its own criticism, and some said he was too soft on crime, but almost all went through the Department of Justice review. Obama didn't use it to reward friends or punish enemies. His focus was systematic reform. Right or wrong, it was guided by principle, not his personal benefit. And that's the difference that matters. It's not whether people agree with the mercy being showed by the president, it's why the president used it. Now, let's take a look at Joe Biden. When he pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, many Americans, even some of his own supporters, struggled with that one. Legally, it was allowed. Morally, it was murky, to say the least. Was it compassion for a struggling son, or a misuse of power undermining public trust? To be fair, the pardon didn't come out of nowhere. Hunter had been convicted on federal gun charges and on tax offenses, not on violent crime or public corruption, and he'd already lived under that blinding spotlight for years. But when the president uses mercy on his own family, it raises a universal question. Is justice still blind? Or is it kind of peeking under the blindfold for last names? Even when an act like that might be understandable on a human level, it weakens the confidence in the system, because mercy and fairness can't coexist with even the appearance of favoritism. And that's the point. The damage isn't just legal, it's moral. Trust once shaken takes generations to repair. And along comes Donald Trump. And here's where things really changed. He didn't just bend the standard. Heck no. He redefined it. His use of clemency wasn't rare or careful. It was personal, transactional, and public. He's granted pardons and commutations not just to allies, but to people who had stayed loyal and supported him politically. You could trace the pattern. Consider political allies like Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, Michael Finn. These weren't minor players. These were central figures, men convicted of lying, obstructing investigations, or violating federal law, and each one received clemency after publicly demonstrating unwavering loyalty to Trump. Donors and insiders, even those convicted of serious financial crimes like Todd and Julie Chrisley, have benefited. The Chrisleys weren't small-time offenders. They were convicted of bank fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy after years of falsifying documents to secure millions in loans and living a luxurious lifestyle on money they hadn't actually earned. After their convictions, their family launched a very public campaign for mercy, including high-profile media appearances with Trump-aligned outlets. In 2025, Trump granted them full pardons, wiping away the federal convictions. Then there were the reality TV personalities and media figures who simply caught his attention, like Rod Blagojevich, the disgraced former governor of Illinois, who just happened to appear on Celebrity Apprentice with Trump. He got his 14-year sentence commuted. Or how about Charles Kushner, father of Jared Kushner, whose crimes included tax evasion, witness retaliation, and hiring a prostitute to blackmail his own brother-in-law. He was pardoned. Now that's quite a list of some very scummy people that Trump helped. It seems that if their stories played well on television, or their narratives reinforced Trump's preferred narratives, clemency followed. And then, of course, there were the broad category pardons of the people charged in connection with the January 6th Capitol attack. In each case, the motives didn't seem to be mercy. They were a message. Loyalty and devotion by criminals gets rewarded. Trump even asked publicly whether he could pardon his own children or himself. To me, just asking the question was an admission of guilt to something, but the question itself technically didn't violate the law. It did, I believe, violate the spirit of it, though, because the power to forgive others isn't supposed to include yourself. That's not mercy, that's immunity. And immunity is how accountability dies. Now, to be fair, not every Trump pardon was wrong. Some were legitimate, but overall the pattern broke something deeper. The public belief that mercy comes from principle, not proximity to power. Once you see the pattern, it's pretty hard to unsee it. Take Congressman Duncan Hunter. Hunter pleaded guilty to stealing more than $250,000 in campaign donations, money given to him by regular people who believed in him, and he spent it on family vacations, private school tuition, luxury flights, and even the expenses tied to an extramarital affair. That's not paperwork error or some kind of mistake. These actions were done with intent. He knew what he was doing was wrong, yet he went right out and did it anyway and betrayed the trust of donors and voters and his own family. But he was pardoned by Trump because he made a show of being a Trump loyalist, and loyalty has become a kind of currency. And then there was George Santos. His wrongdoings weren't cloudy or ambiguous. It was spectacularly blatant. Santos didn't just bend the truth, he lived inside a world of lies. He fabricated his education, his jobs, his heritage, even his personal history. He raised money through deception, misleading supporters, and siphoning donations into his own personal lifestyle. When the convictions finally came down, fraud, money laundering, and more, he was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Then, Santos went on a letter-writing campaign, sending handwritten letters to Trump begging for help. That sniveling little weasel cast himself as a loyal soldier of Trump's broader political fight. Now, Trump didn't pardon him, but he did commute his sentence, springing him from the pokey and sending him home far sooner than anybody else would have been who was convicted of those same crimes. Sure, the conviction still stands, but a lot of ordinary people watched that and heard the same message. If you're close enough to power, the consequences just don't land quite as hard. Let's take a look at a few more. How about Juan Orlando Hernandez? Most people don't even know who he is. But Hernandez was the ex-president of Honduras, a nation that sits on one of the main drug trafficking corridors into the United States. He promised leaders to help fight the cartels, promising to stop the flow of cocaine into our country, promising to be an ally in the war on drugs. But he was lying. He was doing the exact opposite. Federal prosecutors laid it all out clearly. Hernandez helped the cartels move tons of cocaine, not kilos, tons of cocaine into the United States. Cocaine that tore apart families, fueled gang violence, and cost American lives. He turned his country into a narcotics superhighway. So, we extradited him, tried him in open court, convicted him, and a federal judge sentenced him to 45 years in prison, a virtual life sentence. A total victory. We had this lowlife rotting away in a cell, yet despite the fact that right now we have been shooting missiles into suspected drug boats and have an entire carrier strike group gearing up for action in Venezuela, all in the name of a war on narco-terrorism, Trump pardoned this guy and let him go. I don't like to cuss, but what the? I mean, you've got DEA agents who risk their lives to stop this stuff coming into our country. You've got families who've buried children because of these drugs, and you've got our military ready to fight for it. And he let one of the bad guys just walk free. What kind of message does that send? That's not mercy, folks. That's something sinister. And the hits just keep coming. Take Zhongpeng Zhao, CZ, founder of Binance, at the time the world's largest crypto exchange. Zhao pleaded guilty to allowing billions of dollars in illicit transactions to move through his platform. Failures in anti-money laundering controls, sanction violations, and the facilitation of criminal finance on a global scale. It was a stunning fall for one of the most powerful figures in modern finance, and it earned him a prison sentence. But don't worry, he's just fine. You know, billionaires taking care of billionaires, that kind of thing. Zhao received executive clemency from Donald Trump, wiping away the remainder of his punishment. And that's where the questions really begin. In the months leading up to the decision, it appears Zhao earned the clemency after quietly aligning himself with Trump's political comeback. Binance hired former Trump officials. Crypto PACs tied to Binance-linked money heavily supported Trump-aligned candidates. And Zhao made it clear that once his legal future was secure, he intended to help fuel Trump's political and financial machine. And here's the part you can't ignore, folks. In May of 2025, Donald Trump hosted a private black-tie dinner for the top 220 holders of his personal Trump cryptocurrency token. They bought the Trump coin that enriched him, and they gained access to him to boot. That's a fact. When access to the president is effectively filtered through a digital asset that personally benefits him, lines are blurred that should never be blurred in a constitutional republic. Even if no law was actually broken, the signal is unmistakable. And that's why the clemency granted to CZ matters even more. It doesn't exist in isolation. It lands in an environment where crypto money, political loyalty, personal enrichment, and presidential power are already overlapping. At that point, the question isn't whether corruption can be proven. The question is whether trust can survive the appearance that justice and access are for sale. Perception matters, and this perception diminishes the honor of the United States presidency, pure and simple. When you line all of these up, these aren't acts of compassion meant to heal deep wounds in our nation. They aren't gestures of national unity like Washington or Lincoln would do. They don't even pretend to be. What they look like, unmistakably, is a reward system, a pattern, and a message. If you show loyalty to Trump, if you flatter him and his inner circle, if you can help him profit, if you're willing to play the game, mercy can be yours. Bought, traded, negotiated. And that's the exact moment where mercy stops being mercy at all. It becomes a signal, a neon sign to every future insider that the rules are optional for the powerful and permanent for everyone else. That's not justice. That's certainly not good leadership. That's the bending of the laws, one pardon at a time. And here's where the stakes get even higher, because this isn't just about personal corruption or political favoritism anymore. It goes deeper than that. It cuts into the one thing a nation cannot lose without paying a generational price: trust. Rule of law is not just an internal promise. It is the currency of our national reputation. Our allies don't just stand with us because we're big and wealthy and loud. They stand with us because for nearly 250 years, America has claimed to be a nation where the laws actually mean something. A nation that tries, at least, to hold its leaders to the same standards as the lead. But when a president starts using mercy as a political weapon, when loyalty becomes the ticket to freedom, when enemies are punished and friends are protected, our allies notice this, and our adversaries notice this, and the world adjusts. Because if the American president cannot be trusted to apply justice fairly at home, why would anyone trust his word abroad? That's how trust erodes, not all at once, but drip by drip, pardon by pardon, until the world begins to look elsewhere for moral leadership. From experience, I'm fairly confident no damage can be done if the following president does things the way they should be done. But if the current administration is setting a trend that the next one follows as well, I'm telling you folks, all bets are off. So consider this. There is nothing you and I can do today to stop this slide at the national level. We don't hold the pen that signs the pardons. We don't sit in the rooms where the decisions are made. We only get a single vote. But that does not mean we are powerless. At the very least, you can understand it. You can watch it with clear eyes instead of confused ones. You can connect the dots and see the trends before the consequences hit the front page. Because once you understand the pattern, you can prepare yourself, your family, your business, your community for what may come next if the erosion continues. When the norms break at the top, the fallout always lands on regular people too, just like you and me. And that's the even scarier part. When the leader teaches its people that rules don't matter, the people eventually ignore the rules altogether. And once that happens, they rarely find the way back without a whole lot of pain. That's why this matters. Not because of politics, not because of personalities, because trust, national trust, is a fragile thing. Hard to build, easy to lose, almost impossible to rebuild once broken. So stay alert, stay thoughtful, and don't ever cheer for shortcuts that feel good in the moment, because they are very often the same chains that bind the next generation. I'm Jason M. Garrett, and this has been your Dadogram.